800 islands, 5 million people, and on some of them, the ferry comes once a week if the sea allows it. That's the claim I want you to sit with. Not Scotland is beautiful. Everyone already knows that. The real claim is this. Scotland has built one of the most resilient ways of life left in Europe, not despite its isolation, but because of it. And by the end of this journey, you'll understand exactly why thousands of people choose it on purpose every single day when almost nothing about it is easy. Here's where we start. Off Scotland's northern and western coasts, land breaks apart into fragments, some say close to 800 islands. Though the exact number depends on how you define island and who's counting. Roughly 90 of them are inhabited. The rest are just rock, grass, and birds. On a map, it looks less like a country and more like something that's shattered. The population tells its own story. A little over 5 million people call Scotland home, but the vast majority live packed into a handful of cities. Step outside those cities, and the land empties out fast. Drive north for an hour, and you can lose sight of another human being entirely. Drive further, and the silence starts to feel less like emptiness and more like a presence of its own. Weather here doesn't behave. It doesn't follow a season, sometimes not even an hour. Locals have a word for the grey, damp, in-between weather that never fully breaks into a storm and never fully clears either. Dreich. Ask someone here for a forecast and you'll usually get a shrug. Not because they don't care, because they've learned the sky doesn't keep promises. You'd expect that kind of unpredictability to wear a place down. Instead, it did the opposite. When conditions never cooperate, you stop waiting for them to. People here don't pause their lives for good weather. They simply live inside whatever weather shows up. And that adjustment, small as it sounds, is the first clue to something much bigger we're going to trace across this entire country. Watch what happens. The rare moment the sun actually breaks through. Parks fill within minutes. People sit outside in temperatures most of the world would call cold, just to feel it on their skin while it lasts. It's not naivety. It's a kind of discipline, enjoying what's available now, instead of holding out for ideal. That single idea is the thread we're going to follow through every island, every fishing village, every crumbling stone wall, still standing after 1,000 years from the crowded closes of Edinburgh's old town, all the way out to islands where the boat might not come for days. If you're ready for this journey, tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. I want to know who's along for this one. Hit like if the opening hooked you already. Subscribe to Vast Earth so you don't lose this series halfway through, and turn on notifications because where we're headed next, you will not want to miss. There's a harbour on the Isle of Harris where you can watch the entire rhythm of a community depend on a single, unpredictable variable, the sea. Some mornings, it's calm enough for the ferry to cross without incident. Other mornings, it doesn't cross at all. No warning email, no apology, just a cancelled sailing, and an island quietly rearranging its entire week around it. Try to imagine that for a second. Your groceries, your mail, your child's exam papers, even the ambulance, in the worst-case scenario, all of it, at the mercy of wind speed and wave height. Would you be able to build a life on that kind of uncertainty, or would it break you within a month? For the people who live it, the answer isn't complicated. They don't fight the uncertainty. They plan around it. Freezers here aren't a convenience. They're a survival strategy, stocked days in advance, the moment a storm shows up on the forecast. Neighbors check in on each other before bad weather hits, not after. It's not dramatic to them. It's Tuesday. This is where Scotland's true character starts to reveal itself. Not in the cities, but in these edges. The Outer Hebrides, the Orkney, and Shetland Isles, communities where the nearest hospital might be a helicopter ride away, and where popping to the shops can mean a 2-hour round trip by boat. And yet here's the detail that surprises most outsiders: population decline on these islands has, in some places, actually reversed in recent years. People are moving back, not despite the difficulty, because of what the difficulty produces: communities where everyone still genuinely knows and relies on one another in a way most cities quietly lost decades ago. One example worth citing with the island of Eigg, home to fewer than 100 people. In the 1990s, residents pooled their money, fought off absentee landowners, and bought the island outright, becoming one of the first communities in Scotland to own the very ground beneath their homes. Today, the island runs almost entirely on renewable energy, wind, water, and sun, powering homes that, a generation ago, didn't reliably have electricity past a few hours a day. That's not a coincidence. That's a pattern we're going to see again and again on this journey. Isolation, forcing invention; scarcity, forcing unity. The places with the least convenience often produce the strongest sense of ownership over their own lives. If your own neighborhood depended on everyone actually showing up for each other, not politely, but out of real necessity, do you think it would hold together or fall apart? But independence like Eiggs didn't happen in isolation from Scotland's past. To understand why these communities fight so hard to own their land, you have to understand what was taken from them once before, and that story is far darker than anything we've covered so far. Walk through the hills of Sutherland today, and at first, it looks empty, just grass, wind, and the outline of old stone foundations barely visible beneath the heather. No roofs, no doors, no people. But 200 years ago, this emptiness was full. Between the late 1700s and mid-1800s, tens of thousands of people across the Scottish Highlands were forced from land. Their families had worked for generations, not by war, not by famine, but by eviction. Landowners, chasing higher profits from sheep farming, cleared entire glens of tenant families almost overnight. Some were given weeks to leave, some were given days. Historians still debate the exact death toll and the full scale of what happened, but the pattern itself is not in question. Villages emptied, ships filled, families scattered to Canada, to Nova Scotia, to Australia, carrying only what they could carry. This is the part of Scotland's story that doesn't make it onto postcards, and it explains something that might otherwise seem strange: why land ownership, even now, carries so much emotional weight here. Why a small island community pooling their savings to buy back their own ground, the way Eigg did, isn't just a financial decision. It's closing a wound that's been open for 2 centuries. In 2003, Scotland passed legislation giving communities a legal right to buy land from private owners under specific conditions, a direct response to this history. Since then, land now under community ownership across Scotland covers several 100,000 acres, based on figures from Scotland's National Land Reform records. Crofters, small-scale tenant farmers, whose rights were historically almost non-existent, now hold legal protections that would have been unthinkable to their ancestors. Here's what's easy to miss, though. This isn't ancient history being quietly filed away. It's alive. Walk into certain Highland pubs and mention a landowner's name from 200 years ago, and you'll still get a reaction. Ask an elderly crofter about their family's land, and you might hear a story passed down word for word, unchanged, for 6 generations. Would you be able to carry a story like that one that isn't even yours, that happened to ancestors you never met, and still feel it decades later, as if it happened to you? Because that's exactly what many Highland families do, and it's part of why the fight to hold on to land here runs so much deeper than economics. But land is only half the story. The other half is what people built to survive on it in the first place. And one particular structure, still standing after 1,000 years in places, tells you everything about how this country turned hardship into architecture. On the Isle of Lewis, there's a village called Gearanan, where the houses look like they grew out of the hillside rather than being built on top of it. These are black houses, Teighi and Duba in Gaelic, and for centuries they were the standard home across the Outer Hebrides. Thick dry stone walls, packed with earth for insulation. No mortar holding them together, just precisely stacked stone doing the work gravity has done for thousands of years elsewhere. On top, a roof of thatch, tied down with heather rope and weighted with stones to survive winds that regularly tear apart anything built for gentler weather. Here's the detail most people find hard to believe. In many black houses, families didn't just live near their livestock, they lived with them. Humans on one end of the house, cattle on the other, separated by nothing more than a low stone partition. It sounds crude until you understand the logic. Body heat from the animals helped warm the home through brutal Hebridean winters. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was for show. Every design choice existed because it kept people alive. The name Black House itself comes from what happened inside. There was no chimney in the traditional design. Smoke from the peat fire simply drifted upward and out through the thatch, blackening the roof and walls over years of constant use. That soot wasn't a flaw. It helped waterproof and preserve the thatch above it. Even the byproduct of survival was put to work. Think about that for a second. A construction style with no wasted material, no wasted heat, no wasted space, refined not by architects, but by generations of trial and error against a landscape that punished every mistake. This wasn't poverty. This was optimization, centuries before that word existed. By the mid-1900s, most families had moved into modern housing, with proper chimneys, electricity, and running water. And few would argue that was the wrong choice. But at Gearanan, a cluster of black houses has been preserved and restored, some now used as hostels, where visitors can spend a night exactly as families did a century ago. Walk inside one on a windy evening, with the fire lit and the wind howling against stone walls 2 feet thick. And you understand something no photograph can teach you: how a place this exposed still managed to keep people warm, fed, and together for 1,000 years. It raises a question worth sitting with. How much of what we call progress is really just convenience? And how much of what looks like hardship from the outside was actually a kind of quiet mastery? That mastery didn't just apply to shelter. It shaped something even harder to build than stone walls. A language and a way of speaking that nearly vanished entirely. And the story of how it survived is one of the most unexpected turns in this entire journey. There's a sound you can still hear drifting from certain primary school playgrounds in the Outer Hebrides, children shouting to each other in a language older than most nations on Earth, Gaelic. At its peak, centuries ago, Scottish Gaelic was spoken across most of the Scottish mainland. Today, according to Scotland's most recent national census figures, fewer than 60,000 people speak it fluently in a country of over 5 million. Some linguists classify it as definitely endangered. Others argue the classification undersells how fragile its position actually is, particularly outside the island communities where it remains a daily first language rather than a second one learned in a classroom. Here's what makes that number sting a little more. This isn't a language that faded naturally through disuse. For long stretches of history, speaking Gaelic in Scottish schools was actively discouraged, in some documented cases, punished. Children were told, explicitly, that English was the language of opportunity and Gaelic was the language of the past. Multiply that policy across generations, and you get exactly what happened. Grandparents fluent, parents understanding but hesitant to speak, children knowing only fragments. And yet here's the turn in the story. Gaelic didn't disappear. It's fighting back. Gaelic medium education, where children are taught primarily in Gaelic from their earliest years, rather than just studying it as a subject, has expanded significantly over the past 2 decades, with enrollment numbers climbing in areas that had nearly lost the language entirely a generation earlier. Road signs across the Highlands and Islands now appear bilingually, English above, Gaelic below. There's a dedicated Gaelic language television channel. Gaelic music, once confined to folk festivals, now shows up on mainstream streaming charts, sung by young artists who learn the language specifically to reconnect with it. Try to sit with what that actually means. Imagine being handed back a piece of your own family's identity that was taken from your grandparents, and choosing, deliberately, as a teenager or young adult, to learn it anyway. Not because you have to, because you refuse to let it disappear on your generation's watch. That's not nostalgia, that's defiance, dressed up as a language class. But preserving a language is one thing. Preserving an entire way of celebrating, dancing, and gathering as a community, while the modern world constantly offers something faster and easier, instead is a completely different challenge. And that challenge plays out most vividly in one place. A city that transforms itself completely for exactly 3 weeks a year. For 49 weeks of the year, Edinburgh's Old Town moves at the pace you'd expect from a city with buildings older than most countries. Then, for 3 weeks in August, something happens that has no real comparison anywhere else in the world. The Edinburgh Festival Fringe, widely recognized as the largest arts festival on the planet, based on total number of performances staged. In a recent festival year, organizers reported tens of thousands of individual performances across nearly a month. Comedy, theater, dance, spoken word, packed into venues that range from proper theaters to converted basements, church halls, and rooms in pubs never designed to hold an audience. Here's the number that tends to stop people. The city of Edinburgh has a population of roughly 500,000 people. During peak Fringe weeks, festival attendance figures combining locals and visitors have been estimated in the millions. Think about what that actually means logistically. A city built centuries before cars existed, with narrow medieval streets called closes, some barely wide enough for 2 people to pass, suddenly absorbing crowds that dwarf its own population year after year without the entire system collapsing. It shouldn't work, and yet it does, because of something almost nobody plans for when they picture the biggest arts festival in the world. The sheer number of ordinary residents who quietly make it possible. Students turn spare rooms into short-term lets. Local performers who've done this for decades mentor total unknowns, performing publicly for the very first time. Shopkeepers who've run the same store for 30 years adjust their entire year's income around these 3 weeks alone. But it's not universally loved, even by the people who live there. Ask a long-time Old Town resident how they feel about August, and you won't always hear excitement. You'll hear about noise at 2 a.m., flyers covering every surface, familiar cafes suddenly unrecognizable under the weight of crowds. Some residents leave the city entirely for the month, deliberately timing their holidays around the one stretch of the year their own home stops feeling like theirs. That tension is worth sitting with. A festival that simultaneously represents the best of what a place can offer the world and asks its own residents to quietly sacrifice something personal to make it happen. It's a different kind of hardship than a cancelled ferry or a Highland winter of nobody's stranded. Nobody's cut off from a hospital, but underneath it, it's the same trade the rest of this country makes constantly, sacrificing personal comfort for something larger than yourself, and calling that a fair exchange. Edinburgh just makes that trade louder, and for 3 weeks, impossible to ignore. Would you be willing to hand your entire neighborhood over to strangers for 3 weeks a year if it meant the rest of the world got to experience something extraordinary? Some residents say yes, without hesitation. Others say the trade stopped being worth it years ago. Either way, once the last stage is dismantled and the final flyer is peeled off a lamppost, Edinburgh goes quiet again almost overnight, and what's left behind, once the crowds disappear, says just as much about this city as the festival itself. Beautiful landscapes and ancient traditions make for extraordinary footage. They do not pay a mortgage. So before we go any further, it's worth asking the less romantic question: how does a country this remote, this weather-battered, actually sustain itself economically? For much of the 20th century, the answer sat far offshore, beneath the North Sea. Oil and gas, discovered in the 1970s, transformed Scotland's economy almost overnight, turning towns like Aberdeen into major industrial hubs within a single generation. At its peak, the North Sea was one of the most productive offshore oil regions in the world, and the wealth it generated reshaped entire communities that had spent centuries depending on fish rather than fuel. But oil fields deplete. In recent decades, extraction from the North Sea has been in steady decline based on UK government energy figures, leaving towns that built their identity around it facing an uncomfortable question. What happens when the resource that defined you for 2 generations starts running out? Scotland's answer has been to pivot towards something the weather here has always supplied in abundance, whether anyone wanted it or not. Off the coast of Orkney sits the European Marine Energy Centre, the world's first accredited test site for wave and tidal power. Operating since 2003, engineers came here deliberately because Orkney's waters are some of the roughest and most tidally powerful in Europe. The exact conditions that once made this coastline dangerous now make it one of the most valuable renewable energy testing grounds on the Parsifal planet. That same logic runs through Scotland's wider energy shift. The same relentless winds that once battered ships and flattened crops now spin some of the largest offshore wind installations in the world. Scotland has set some of the most ambitious renewable energy targets in Europe, and in recent years, wind power alone has generated enough electricity on certain days to cover the equivalent of the entire country's demand. According to Scottish government energy reports, with surplus power exported to England and beyond. There's something almost poetic in that, if you sit with it. The exact force that made life here so difficult for centuries is now the thing paying for it. Fishing, too, remains far more significant than most outsiders assume. Scottish waters produce a substantial share of the entire UK's seafood catch, with langoustines, salmon, and mackerel from Scottish waters appearing on menus across Europe and Asia. Aquaculture farmed salmon, in particular, has grown into one of Scotland's largest food exports, generating hundreds of millions of pounds annually, though not without controversy. Environmental groups have raised ongoing concerns about the ecological impact of large-scale salmon farming on wild fish populations and coastal ecosystems, a debate that remains unresolved and genuinely contested within Scotland itself. Then there's whisky, an industry so tied to Scottish identity that people forget it's also simply a major export business. Scotch whisky exports are valued in the billions of pounds annually, according to industry trade figures, shipped to over 100 countries worldwide. Behind every bottle sits a production process largely unchanged. For centuries, malted barley, pure water, and years of patient aging in oak barrels. In a country with the exact damp, temperature-stable climate that whiskey needs to mature properly, the land's stubborn, unglamorous weather once again turns out to be the hidden ingredient. So here's the honest picture. This isn't a country running on nostalgia and tourism alone, however much the postcards suggest otherwise. It's an economy that has been forced, again and again, to reinvent what its harshest resources are actually good for, and each time found an answer nobody would have predicted a generation earlier. But an economy adapting is only half the equation. The other half is whether the people stay long enough to be part of it. And on that question, Scotland's small communities have spent the last few decades fighting one of their hardest, most personal battles. Ask almost any small Highland or island community about their biggest ongoing challenge, and you'll hear the same answer, phrased slightly differently every time: keeping young people from leaving. It's not hard to understand why they go. A university education, in most cases, means relocating to Glasgow, Edinburgh, or further south entirely. Career opportunities in specialized fields are concentrated almost exclusively in cities. And when you're 18, watching a phone screen show you the entire rest of the world in high definition, a village of a few hundred people can start to feel less like home and more like a waiting room. National population data, tracked over recent decades, shows a consistent pattern across rural Scotland young adults, leaving remote areas at higher rates than any other age group. In the most sparsely populated regions, some communities have watched their average resident age climb steadily higher, year after year, as the working age population thins out. For a small community, this isn't a distant statistic. It's personal. It's watching a childhood friend's family pack a moving van. It's a primary school class shrinking from 15 students to 6. It's a rugby team that can no longer field a full side. Some islands hit that decline so hard, they nearly disappeared entirely. The Isle of Ulva, off the west coast of Mull, had a population in the hundreds in the 19th century. By 2018, it had fallen to just 6 people. 6, on an island roughly the size of a small town's worth of farmland. That same year, the local community, backed by Scotland's land reform legislation, bought Ulva outright from its private owner. The same legal mechanism that let the people of Eigg reclaim their island decades earlier. The plan wasn't nostalgic preservation, it was deliberate repopulation. Restoring long derelict crofts, rebuilding the island's only pier, and actively recruiting new residents willing to commit to living and working there permanently. It's a slow process, and an uncertain one. Nobody involved would claim Ulva's future is guaranteed, but it represents something researchers and island councils across Scotland have started taking seriously, that decline isn't always irreversible if a community is willing to fight for its own repopulation, with the same stubbornness it once used just to survive. And return migration isn't limited to formal buyouts like Ulva's across the Highlands and Islands. A quieter, more informal version of the same pattern shows up again and again. People who leave in their late teens and 20s often do return, typically in their 30s, sometimes with children of their own in tow. Not everyone, not even most, but enough that some island councils have begun actively designing housing and job programs specifically to make that return easier. Ask why, and the answer is rarely economic. It's closer to this that a city built for millions of strangers, however exciting at 22, can start to feel strangely hollow by 35. That knowing your neighbor's name, really knowing it, along with their family history and the shape of their whole life, is worth more than it once seemed. That raising a child somewhere, everyone still looks out for each other, isn't a limitation. It's a rare kind of luxury most of the world quietly lost. It isn't a perfect cycle. Plenty leave and never look back. Plenty who stay resent, watching friends go. But places like Ulva prove something worth holding on to, that even 6 people can be enough to start rebuilding, if the will is stubborn enough. Which brings us, finally, to the only question that actually matters after everything we've covered. Not whether Scotland is beautiful, not whether it's difficult, but whether, after everything you now know about it, you'd choose it too. Not if you need certainty. The ferry doesn't care about your schedule, and neither does the weather. Plans here are written in pencil, always. Not if you need anonymity. In a village of 400 people, everyone will know your name by the end of the first week, and likely your business not long after that. Not if convenience matters more to you than almost anything else. The nearest hospital might be a helicopter ride away. The nearest supermarket might mean a ferry crossing. Here, just popping out is rarely just anything. But if you're searching for something else, a place where hardship isn't hidden but worn like a shared history, where a language nearly erased came back through sheer stubbornness, where communities pooled their savings to buy back the ground beneath their own feet, then, somewhere in these islands, something might make sense to you that nothing else has. Remember the number we opened with: 800 islands, 5 million people, a ferry that comes once a week, if the sea allows it. That was never really a statistic about geography. It was the first clue to everything that followed the black houses built to waste nothing. The land reclaimed after 2 centuries of loss. The language taught back to children whose grandparents were punished for speaking it. The young people who leave chasing the wider world and return chasing something they didn't know they'd lost. Here's the thesis, the one thing worth carrying with you from all 30 minutes of this. Scotland didn't survive its isolation by fighting it, is less than. It survived by building an entire identity around it, turning hardship into architecture, turning scarcity into community, turning distance into devotion. Maybe that's the real lesson underneath all of it. We spend so much of modern life chasing convenience, chasing more options, chasing the version of home that requires nothing of us in return. But the people who choose these islands, these villages, this weather, they chose the opposite. They chose a place that asks something of them every single day. And somehow, that's exactly why it holds them. So would you live there? Not hypothetically, actually, knowing everything you now know. Tell me honestly in the comments. I want to know how many of you would say yes. If this journey through Scotland gave you something to think about, hit like and share it with someone who'd sit through all 30 minutes with you. Next week, we're heading somewhere even further from everything. A place where the nearest neighboring country is over 1,000 miles away and where fewer people have ever visited than have stood on the summit of Everest. You will not want to miss that one. Until then, remember, the places that ask the most from you are usually the ones that give the most back.